Assalamualaikum dan selamat pagi anda bersama saya Nabilah Khaleeda dan ini Niaga AWANI. Seperti biasa pada jam ini kita akan berikan laporan berita bisnes kewangan dan juga ekonomi dan ini adalah dalam negara dan juga antarabangsa. Jadi kita mulakan dengan perkembangan berikut di mana Deklarasi Kuala Lumpur mengenai penggunaan platform media sosial yang selamat dan juga bertanggungjawab untuk ASEAN dilihat sebagai penting dalam menjaga keharmonian di antara negara-negara anggota. Dan menurut beberapa orang pakar negara-negara di dalam ASEAN kini berdepan dengan masalah sama iaitu keselamatan media sosial. Justru sekiranya ia tidak dibendung atau dikawal bermula daripada sekarang, dibimbang akan memberi kesan pada khususnya hubungan bilateral di antara negara-negara yang bersahabat. Jadi untuk kita berbincang lanjut bersama dengan pakar pada dalam talian pada ketika ini adalah Profesor Teknologi Dr. Zuriati Ahmad Zulkarnain, Profesor Rangkaian Komputer dan Keselamatan Cyber. Mungkin Prof, pertama sekali mungkin Prof boleh kongsikan sejauh mana Deklarasi Kuala Lumpur ini sebenarnya mampu nak menyelaraskan undang-undang serta tindakan penguatkuasaan rentas sepadan. Kalau kita lihat sedangkan setiap negara ASEAN sendiri sebenarnya mempunyai tahap kebebasan bersuara dan juga pendekatan kawal selia media sosial yang berbeza. Jadi bagaimana kita nak seragamkan kesemua ini?
Assalamualaikum. Terima kasih Nabilah. Seperti mana kita maklum ya bahawa setiap negara ASEAN ini mempunyai pendekatan kawal selia media sosial yang berbeza dari segi kebebasan bersuara dan juga media sosial. Jadi saya melihat deklarasi ini bertujuan ya untuk memperkukuhkan usaha secara kolektif Deklarasi Kuala Lumpur ini sangatlah bermakna dan merupakan satu yang harus dilaksanakan secara tuntas ya bagi memudahkan kerjasama serantau pada dasarnya. Bila kita melihat kepada setiap perundangan di negara ASEAN itu mungkin ada yang terlalu ketat dan juga terlalu longgar ya. Jadi dengan usaha ini ataupun inisiatif deklarasi ini akan memudahkan kerjasama serantau secara dasarnya ya. Namun ia tidak mencukupi untuk penyelarasan undang-undang ataupun penguatkuasaan rentas sempadan yang kuat kerana kepelbagaian ASEAN ini berteraskan kepada semangat ini yang di peringkat perundingan secara konsensus dan juga tanpa campur tangan. Dan setiap yang kita tahu bahawa dari segi tingkah laku ya mempunyai definisi yang tersendiri bagaimana untuk setiap pengguna itu menjadi pengguna media sosial yang bertanggungjawab, seterusnya memberikan kebaikan ya kepada setiap pengguna yang lain. Jadi justru itu Deklarasi Kuala Lumpur ini sangat penting dari aspek bagi memastikan setiap pengguna mempunyai komitmen ya untuk memastikan bahawa setiap orang itu bertanggungjawab ya supaya dari situ akan adanya kerjasama tambahan dari sudut perkongsian maklumat dan juga dari sudut inisiatif undang-undang yang boleh memastikan setiap negara anggota itu dapat bekerja dengan lebih tuntas dan juga lebih baik.
Dan berdasarkan apa yang Prof katakan tadi, apa jua kerangka ataupun dasar yang ditubuhkan, tanggungjawab individu itu adalah kunci utama untuk kejayaan kepada deklarasi ini. Tapi kalau Prof boleh kongsikan juga, kalau kita nak tahu, adakah pendekatan deklarasi ini sebenarnya cukup tegas dalam menangani penyebaran maklumat palsu semasa pilihan raya atau hanya menjadi kerangka normatif tanpa kuasa mengikat dalam konteks keselamatan digital dan juga diplomatik serantau?
Okey, kita melihat ya kepada media sosial, penggunaan kepentingan media sosial. Yang pentingnya di sini adalah dari sudut penyebaran maklumat ya. Yang sangat dirisaukan adalah bila mana penyebaran maklumat palsu. Lebih-lebih lagi semasa pilihan raya dan sebagainya. Saya melihat deklarasi ini sebagai kerangka normatif ya bagi mengumpul ya secara dasarnya apakah tingkah laku yang sepatutnya ya dari segi norma kehidupan manusia ya yang merentas kepada undang-undang yang ada di serantau ini ya di mana semuanya tidak bersetuju ya untuk handle maklumat palsu. Setiap negara anggota saya melihat committed untuk menangani masalah maklumat palsu. Jadi saya rasa ini merupakan satu titik ya temu ya di mana setiap negara anggota akan lebih mengeratkan kerjasama digital ya dari sudut bila berlakunya kerjasama digital itu mereka melihat kepada teras utama iaitu perkongsian maklumat yang benar dan sahih ya di mana ia lebih kepada pelaksanaan secara sukarela dan saya melihat bila mana ada establish ya bila mana standard ini di-establish apakah mekanisme yang establish ini yang telah pun dipersetujui di kalangan negara anggota ia akan lebih menggalakkan ya negara anggota untuk memahami definisi maklumat tidak sahih, maklumat palsu yang boleh menimbul ancaman ya terhadap masyarakat, especially melibatkan pilihan raya di mana setiap orang ingin maklumat yang sahih. Jadi saya rasa ini merupakan satu kerangka normatif yang harus dilihat secara kolektif untuk memastikan definisi itu difahami secara global tentang penguatkuasaan terhadap maklumat yang sahih sahaja.
Prof, boleh menjelaskan kepada kami bagaimana kita boleh pastikan Malaysia menggunakan deklarasi Kuala Lumpur ni tidak disalahgunalah kalau kita boleh katakan oleh kerajaan-kerajaan tertentu untuk supaya tidak menyekat suara pembangkang atau kritikan sah atas nama keselamatan media sosial ini.
Alright, saya melihat ya kepada setiap orang memerlukan maklumat. Setiap orang akan menyampaikan maklumat. Jadi pada saya penyampaian maklumat ini sebenarnya adalah merupakan satu komitmen terhadap hak asasi manusia. Macam mana untuk kita memastikan bahawa kewajipan ya terhadap saluran maklumat yang betul, yang sahih ya, ia harus sampai kepada pelbagai peringkat masyarakat ya. Jadi menyebabkan ia termasuklah perlindungan terhadap hak asasi manusia di peringkat antarabangsa yang telah pun digazetkan dan perlu difahami oleh setiap orang, termasuklah perlindungan kebebasan bersuara. Jadi pada saya deklarasi ini sangat penting terhadap ya untuk melindungi ya undang-undang domestik, ketelusan ya dan juga advokasi serantau terhadap keperluan untuk mendapatkan ataupun menyalurkan ya maklumat yang sahih ini merupakan hak setiap orang, setiap individu ya bila mana mereka melalui melakukan komunikasi secara digital. Jadi saya rasa pada saya deklarasi ini sangat penting terhadap semua orang, ya semua pengguna untuk memastikan bahawa hak masing-masing itu semasa berada di alam digital itu adalah merupakan hak asasi manusia dan haruslah diberikan perlindungan sebaik mungkin dan haruslah di situ perlu ada pemantauan ya dari segi dasar tadbir urus digital. Kalau kita lihat di peringkat negara anggota ASEAN ya perlu ada satu badan ya untuk memastikan bahawa ia merupakan satu ya di mana garis panduan ya telah pun harus diwujudkan dan haruslah disokong dari segi pelaksanaannya yang untuk menggabungkan perlindungan kebebasan bersuara di samping matlamat keselamatan media sosial.
Dan kita tahu ini berkenaan dengan media sosial ni adalah perubahan era digital yang bergerak terlalu pantas dan kita pun perlu sentiasa orang kata bergerak ke hadapan, selangkah ke hadapan untuk sentiasa pastikan keselamatan sosial itu sering terjaga dan apabila kita nak kekalkan keselamatan pada peringkat serantau ini juga perlu kita tingkatkan langkah yang satu langkah lebih atas lah kalau kita boleh katakan dari segi kerjasama itu. Jadi terima kasih diucapkan kepada Profesor Teknologis Dr. Zuriati Ahmad Zulkarnain, Profesor Rangkaian Komputer dan Keselamatan Cyber EPF dan segalanya akan kami rangkumkan dalam semua platform digital Astro AWANI. Baik, saya akan teruskan dengan perkembangan seterusnya di mana Timbalan Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Dr. Ahmad Zahid Hamidi menyatakan bahawa perubahan dasar Amerika Syarikat termasuk dalam sistem pendidikan perlu dilihat sebagai peluang. Beliau menegaskan bahawa situasi ini membuka peluang untuk meneroka kelebihan pendidikan di negara lain seperti di United Kingdom.
Beliau yang juga Menteri Kemajuan Desa dan Wilayah menekankan bahawa UK merupakan antara negara yang telah lama menjalin kerjasama pendidikan dengan Malaysia, justru perlu diterokai lebih lanjut sebagai alternatif. Menurut Ahmad Zahid, walaupun MARA telah membuat keputusan untuk menghentikan penghantaran pelajar ke Amerika, setiap ancaman perlu dianggap sebagai peluang yang membuka ruang baharu untuk pendidikan luar negara. Beliau menegaskan bahawa dalam situasi mencabar seperti ini, pendekatan lebih strategik harus diambil dengan memanfaatkan sistem pendidikan UK yang telah dikenal pasti keberkesanannya sejak sekian lama. Sebagai pengerusi Jawatan Kuasa Pendidikan dan Latihan Teknikal dan Vokasional Negara TVET, Ahmad Zahid menyuarakan pandangan ini semasa sidang media selepas mempengerusikan pramesyuarat bersama delegasi Malaysia sempena lawatan kerja 4 hari ke UK. Sementara itu, pengerusi MARA Datuk Ashraf Wajdi Dusuki memaklumkan bahawa mulai tahun ini MARA tidak lagi akan menaja pelajar ke Amerika Syarikat susulan pelaksanaan dasar baharu oleh Presiden Donald Trump. Dasar tersebut termasuk penghentian pemprosesan visa untuk semua pelajar asing dan kemungkinan penilaian permohonan visa baharu berdasarkan kandungan media sosial mereka.
Alright, right now we're diving into a story of empowerment, education and real impact, where many of us may be familiar with Soul's Energy, but behind it is the Soul's Foundation, a social impact organization dedicated to uplifting undeserved communities, especially Malaysia's indigenous youth. And through a powerful partnership with Yinson and the support of the Y4Y grant, Soul's Foundation is now rolling out targeted programs aimed at bridging long-standing gaps in education and employment, particularly for the Orang Asli and Orang Asal communities. So joining us today is Nabilah Khaleeda, the Executive Director, Soul's Foundation, to share how this initiative is changing lives and what lies ahead. Perhaps we could start with the beginning. Daniela, could you walk us through what the foundation is really about and how it connects back to your larger mission?
Soul's Foundation is a Malaysian tax-exempt organization with 25 years' experience in serving, educating, and empowering the B40. We do this with free education, personal development, employment support, and of course, the energy access for rural Orang Asli and Orang Asal communities.
And on a personal note, if you could share a little more details on, we know you've been at the heart of this work for years. So what actually drives you as an executive director, especially when it comes to first empowering undeserved communities, like I mentioned earlier, but this is through initiatives like rural electrification, solar lighting, and also financial literacy?
Honestly, I don't know where I'd be without electricity personally, but definitely not here with you. This is urgent. The limitations and barriers that the lack of energy access creates for community have major developmental effects. So there is inspiration for me in Kampung Energy Access Project, but most importantly, there's the weight of the problem at hand that drives me and our team. And of course, nowadays with the solar power technology that we have access to and the effective deployment system that we've developed, we can speed up the access that they've waited generations for.
Let's talk a little bit more on the partnership with Yinson. First of all, congrats, if I'm not too late to congratulate you on being selected for the Yinson's Y4Y grant. I hope I pronounced it correctly. It's a big milestone, honestly, but could you share what this grant enables you to do differently, or at a larger scale, why it's a game changer for the communities you serve?
Thank you so much. The Yinson for Youth grant aligns very well with our values and what we're trying to achieve. This sponsorship goes straight to Kampung Tompesel, a very specific community in Srijaya, Pahang. And it is designated to electrify 15 homes of families from the indigenous community of the Samabari tribe. But what the collaboration does for the indigenous community at large is basically back and empower the solution itself. And also emphasize that while we talk about a just energy transition, it cannot be just if it's not led by indigenous people for their own communities.
I understand that the solar light installations are already underway in the kampong areas, but what are some of the tangible outcomes you're aiming for? And most importantly, how do you hope this transforms the everyday lives of the people there once it's completed?
Since we've been installing this for 3 years, we know what to expect, and we expect an immediate improvement in well-being and quality of life. The mothers will feel safer to cook, clean, and sew at night. Parents will worry less about house fires since candles and kerosene lamps will be almost out of use. Children often study longer and do their homework in the evening. And it's very important because this increases their attendance in schools because now they're not afraid to go to class with an unfinished homework or get scolded by their teachers. Families will be able to charge their phones in their own home and not have to drive somewhere to do it. There will be more time spent together as a family in the evening, and friends and neighbors can come over more often because now the entire community is safer. And also, since the battery lasts for 19 hours once fully charged, we know that the community tends to keep the light on overnight until the morning because this keeps them safer from wild animals and thieves. And of course, while they get more in life, they also get to save more. So they get more at a lower cost. And they save this money that goes back into food, education, medicine, the very essentials of life.
Not only they just get access to educations more, they get to save when it comes to electricity. But we know this initiative puts a strong focus on Orang Asli and Orang Asal youth. But can you enlighten us on why is this group so critical to support, and what unique challenges do they face when it comes to access to education or meaningful employment? And if I may, or can you share a moment or story that's stayed with you and maybe a young person who really embodied the spirit of this program, for example, or anything that you can share?
We have to acknowledge that Malaysia has world-class infrastructure in urban areas like KL and the bigger cities. But at the same time, about 280,000 Orang Asli and Orang Asal families still live without reliable and affordable energy access. These families are as deserving as any other, and they have the same potential for development, education, entrepreneurship, you name it. Without this basic infrastructure, though, it is extremely hard to make that potential come to fruition. A chance must be provided. Some of the best examples of improved achievements with the right support are walking and talking in our team. Orang Asli youth who joined our Solar Academy program, a 12-month fully sponsored scholarship for training, apprenticeship, and job placements in the green energy industry. For instance, my colleague Irul, once he graduated from the Solar Academy program, he joined this project team that carries out the Orang Asli village installations. And he has been advocating for his kampung since day one. His kampung does not have electricity, it does not have water supply, it does not have a school, or that many children drop out. But with our team last year, he brought stable electricity to his kampung for the first time. 41 families that still live without water, schools, or clinics, but they do have electricity now. This is a big step forward.
So what kind of impact, moving forward, what kind of impact are you hoping to see from this program, perhaps in the next 1 to 2 years? And what kind of measurable or even intangible impact do you hope to see from this program? Perhaps if I may add, in addition to this Yinson partnership, are there other partners or supporters you're looking to collaborate to scale and expand the impact of this program? Daniela.
We expect immediate short-term and long-term outcomes. Immediately, there is reduced noise and smoke pollution in the house and community and all of the comforts that I mentioned earlier. But also with increased savings, each family will redistribute that money to other needs, and this will restore their dignity in some of the most foundational areas of life. So far, since 2022, the homes we have installed for have saved a collective total of 14.5 million ringgit. That says a lot of the power of deploying this at scale. The uninterrupted energy access will also normalize the new level of well-being and comfort, and this will empower the community to dream for more, to want to achieve, will motivate them. We always visit 6-12 months later, and they often tell us about their next dreams and their next ambitions, and this is the foundational step towards development, individual and community development. Now, this program started in 2022 with 243 installations, and up to date, we've installed about 3,700. And we can only achieve this kind of growth with the support of corporate, government, and other impact partners. We are open to collaborate with aligned partners because there is still a lot of work to be done.
And perhaps last but not least, before we end this session, in the midst of all challenges, what keeps you hopeful about the work that you do every day, and what gives you that extra push to keep going and to actually help all these undeserved communities?
First of all, it's the trust from communities and people who live with the solutions that we provide and feel the improvements personally. Then it's the relentless dedication to make an impact from our team here and our partners. And lastly, I've been doing impact work for 17 years. I don't romanticize the work anymore. For me, it's not about saving the world, but it is about enabling those in need, community by community, to move on to a path for a better future.
All right, from solar electrification to future-ready skills, this is a transformative initiative with heart and purpose. So thank you so much to Daniela, Executive Director, Souls Foundation, for sharing such inspiring insights into the work, what Souls Foundation is doing with Yinson, and we look forward to seeing how this initiative continues to grow and impact lives in the future. All right, we go for a short break. We'll be right back.
Bila kerja sendiri, semua kena buat sendiri. Tapi, bersama rakan niaga, semuanya dapat ditempuhi bersama.
Malaysia sebenarnya berada di kedudukan kedua terburuk di dunia berkaitan keseimbangan hidup dan kerja.
LRT3 sudah akan mula beroperasi suku ketiga 2025. Kerja-kerja fizikal dan penstrukturan sudah mencecah 95%.
KPM sebenarnya sedang memperincikan cadangan untuk menyediakan allowance kos sara hidup tingkatan 6.
Libat urus antara umat Islam dan agama lain penting supaya dapat mengelakkan ataupun membawa kepada Islamofobia.
Jangan tinggal kamu lagi. Apa yang memang nak Abang akan mati? Kalau ada apa-apa yang jadi dekat Noah, pasti kau aku kerjakan saja.
Noah tak pernah pun cakap buruk pasal Abang kat siapa-siapa.
Semua salah dia, Mak buat penjam mata je.
Oh, takkan tinggalkan Abang sampai bila-bila.
Jangan pakai nama Tuhan.
Dia bukan syurga. Di Astro Ria dan Astro Go.
Tariffs on imports of products from China reaching up to 145%.
Tariffs on the rest of the world are sitting at 10%, with the potential for reciprocal tariffs to be reimposed within 90 days.
Kunjungan rasmi Presiden China ke Malaysia ini menunjukkan komitmen kedua-dua negara untuk meningkatkan hubungan diplomatik ke tahap yang lebih strategik.
Bertemu kembali dalam Niaga AWANI dan pada waktu ini saya akan tunjukkan berkenaan dengan pergerakan ringgit di mana ringgit dibuka tinggi berbanding dolar Amerika Syarikat pada Selasa ketika pasaran menilai prospek dasar tarif Presiden Amerika Syarikat Donald Trump dan ini adalah menurut seorang penganalisis. Pada 8 pagi, mata wang tempatan naik kepada 4.2165 atau 2490 berbanding dolar Amerika pada 4.2530 atau 2605 pada Jumaat lepas. Dan Ketua Pendidikan Pelaburan UOB Kayhian Wealth Advisors, Senin Berhad Muhammad Siddiq Jantan berkata ringgit disokong oleh dolar yang lemah, didorong oleh ketegangan perdagangan Amerika Syarikat dan China dan kebimbangan mengenai tarif dan cukai baharu yang mungkin dilaksanakan daripada Washington. Dan beliau berkata indeks dolar Amerika Syarikat turun 0.11% kepada 98.60 mata dan ketika ditutup pada Jumaat menyokong mata wang lain juga. Jadi untuk hari ini saya akan kongsikan pergerakan ringgit itu untuk setakat jam 9.25 pagi. Kalau kita boleh saksikan pergerakan nilai ringgit berbanding dengan dolar Amerika itu adalah pada sekitar paras 4.24 dan seperti yang dikatakan tadi ia mengukuh sedikit berbanding dengan hari sebelumnya. Kalau kita boleh tunjukkan dalam sekitar 29 ia sekitar 4.2429 dan kalau kita nak kongsikan kepada penonton-penonton di rumah, jika graf itu menurun nilai ringgit itu mengukuh dan jika graf itu menaik ia menunjukkan ataupun mengindikasi sebagai nilai ringgit itu melemah. Dan kalau kita dapat saksikan dalam jangka masa seminggu, nilai ringgit itu menunjukkan ketidakpastian ataupun ketidakimbangan antara nilai ringgit berbanding dengan dolar Amerika. Kalau kita boleh bandingkan sedikit pada bulan Mei, ia mengukuh pada sekitar 4.1894, namun memasuki pertengahan bulan Mei kita dapat saksikan ia melemah yang agak tinggi. Ini adalah disebabkan oleh ketidaktentuan ataupun dasar perdagangan antara Amerika Syarikat dan juga China itu sehinggalah mencapai 4.3396 dan ia kembali mengukuh sedikit demi sedikit sehinggalah ke paras hari ini iaitu 4.24. Itu adalah prestasi ringgit berbanding dengan $1 Amerika Syarikat dan itu adalah prestasi ringgit. Dan seterusnya berkaitan dengan Bursa Malaysia, kita dapat saksikan prestasi FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI atau FBM KLCI untuk hari ini pada 9.11 pagi ia berada pada paras 1,510.14, menaik sedikit 0.12% dan 1.79 mata. Dan ini adalah peningkatan yang sedikit nilainya, tapi kalau kita nak lihat dalam jangka masa seminggu, kita dapat saksikan prestasi FBM KLCI bermula pada Selasa, ia dibuka tinggi pada sekitar 1,531.45 dan pada hari Rabu ia terus menunjukkan pengukuhan yang agak tinggi pada pembukaan 9.20 pagi juga 1,530, namun memasuki sehinggalah ke hari ini yang menunjukkan penurunan sedikit demi sedikit sehinggalah mencapai 1,510 pada hari ini iaitu 1,510.46. Ini adalah angka yang terkini, namun menunjukkan peningkatan pada hari sebelumnya. Kalau kita boleh tunjukkan sedikit lebih kurang pada hari 30 hari bulan 5, hari terakhir untuk bulan Mei iaitu sekitar 1,514.88 dan kita akan terus pantau prestasi Bursa Malaysia dan juga ringgit sepanjang minggu ini bermula hari Isnin juga sehinggalah Jumaat, dan itu yang kami dapat kongsikan berkenaan dengan prestasi di peringkat tempatan. Kita akan teruskan dengan peringkat antarabangsa pula. The S&P 500 index closed higher on Monday as investors were still optimistic over trade talks between the United States and its trading partners, despite President Donald Trump's latest salvo to double tariffs on imported steel and aluminium. Trump said late on Friday, May 30th, he planned to increase tariffs on imported steel and aluminium to 50% to 25% starting Wednesday, just hours after he accused China of violating an agreement. China said on Monday that US President Donald Trump's accusations that Beijing had violated the consensus reached in Geneva trade talks were groundless and promised to take forceful measures to safeguard its interest. The Trump administration wants countries to provide their best offer on trade negotiations by Wednesday as officials seek to accelerate talks with multiple partners ahead of a US-imposed deadline in just 5 weeks, according to a draft letter to negotiating partners viewed by Reuters.
I think the 50% tariff placed on steel and aluminum is not just rhetoric, it's reality. It is something that is going to last, possibly through the entire Trump administration. Our Washington analysis political strategy arm believes that the administration is trying to do is to drive new capacity within the U.S. for both steel and aluminum production, rather than simply trying to use this as a negotiating ploy.
Shares of US steel companies rose, led by Cleveland-Cliffs. Other steel makers also rose, including Nucor and Steel Dynamics. However, shares of automakers such as Ford and General Motors were lower. All right, now let's break down what's happening in the US stock market. And behind me is the Standard & Poor's 500 index stocks categorized by sectors and industries, and size represents market cap. And there's a lot of mix, green and red over here, and green means gains and red means losses. And we will start with some of the Magnificent Seven, or the tech giants, which is Nvidia. Nvidia shows a green color here and was up by 1.67%, and the current stock price is 137.38. But China's biggest technology companies have begun to process of switching to homegrown chips as they contend with a dwindling stockpile of Nvidia processors and tightening United States export controls. which is reported by the Financial Times on Thursday. And Alibaba, Tencent and Baidu are among those starting to test alternative semiconductors to meet growing domestic demand for the AI. This is according to a report as well, which is citing industry executives, and that's on NVIDIA. Moving on to Google, we can show that Google, it shows a red color over here, which was down a little by 1.58%, and the current stock price is 169.03. But the latest update on Google agreed to spend $500 million over 10 years to overhaul its compliance structure to settle shareholder litigation accusing the search engine company of antitrust violations, settlement papers show, and the preliminary settlement of so-called derivative litigation against officials at Google parent Alphabet, which includes Chief Executive Sundar Pichai and Google co-founders, was filed late on Friday. And the changes include creating a standalone board committee to oversee risk and compliance, previously the responsibility of the Alphabet board's audit and compliance committee, and that's on Google. And moving on to Microsoft, Microsoft shows green color as well, which was up or increased by 0.35%, and the current stock price is 461.97. But on Microsoft, it would invest 400 million in Switzerland. The company said on Monday, with the money going towards developing its cloud computing and artificial intelligence infrastructure. And the US tech company announced the investment at a meeting of Swiss Economy Minister Guy Parliament and its Vice Chair Brad Smith in Bern. Microsoft, which employs 1,000 people in Switzerland, did not give details on how many jobs the investment would create, and the money will be used to expand and upgrade its 4 data centers near Geneva and Zurich, responding to increased demand for AI and cloud computing services in Switzerland. And the expansion will serve existing and new customers and allow data to remain within Swiss borders, an important requirement for sectors like healthcare, finance, and also government. And Microsoft will also expand its partnership work with small and medium-sized companies and step up training efforts to help people use AI and digital tools. And that's on Microsoft. Meanwhile, Apple, as I can show over here, it shows green color as well, but it was up by 0.42%. And the current stock price is 201.71. But Apple has submitted a legal challenge to an EU order to open up its closed ecosystem to rivals such as Meta and also Alphabet's Google, saying the demands are unreasonable and hamper innovation. And the European Commission had in March detailed how Apple must comply with the Digital Markets Act, which aims to rein in the power of big tech. And Apple said the EU's interoperability requirements create a process that is unreasonable, costly, and stifles innovation, where Meta, Google, Spotify, and Garmin are among companies that have requested to Apple users NVIDIA. All right, moving on to next update, we have the stories of the week by World Economic Forum, and then we'll go for a short break. We'll be right back.
I think play is so important, right? The gamified learning experience and why it's so important is what we strive to create is intrinsic motivation. You're learning because it's actually fun and enjoyable to go through this experience. Many of our members go through the experiences not even realizing that it's a learning experience until they're like, oh wow, I acquired all of these really valuable skills. You're not forced to use Goodwill. You're using it intentionally because it's your own choice. And for us to compete and go directly to that young person, we have to make it as fun, as enjoyable as an experience as possible. Artificial intelligence today, or Gen AI today, has almost the biggest benefits early on for those early careers, and as a result can really lift this entire generation. So I really do see artificial intelligence having this role or the potential of serving as a great equalizer, but only if everyone can benefit from it.
Apple tree in Kaduna, where the climate isn't naturally suitable for apples, has been quite a challenge. However, with the help of AI and precisely Microsoft Copilot, I've been able to make significant progress.
Being part of the AI Youth Initiative has been a life-changing experience. I feel more empowered to contribute to a sustainable and inclusive future.
semangat pengorbanan dan keindahan Aidiladha.
Membicarakan perihal ibadat dan berita haji.
Ilmu-ilmu yang mana kita dapat tu insya-Allah kita kongsi-kongsikan.
Peranan ibu bapa untuk mendedahkan tentang umrah dan haji ini sangat-sangat penting.
Ikuti perkongsian ilmu dalam Bual Bicara Santai.
Hari kasih sayang, pengorbanan dan juga keinsafan yang disatukan.
Situasi ini sebiji ketika haji. Nanti bila buat ibadah haji, mudahlah.
Cuaca yang sangat panas.
Apa benda saya buat semua saya seronok je.
Saya memang rasa macam terapuk.
Drama penuh tauladan dan inspirasi yang menyentuh jiwa.
Abang ingin sekali bisa pergi naik haji bersama keluarga.
Nasib baik mah hidup. Mak ada kawan. Nasyidnya kena lembut, kena lunak.
Lagu-lagu rock banyak lagi unsur-unsur Islamik.
Sambut Aidilladha dengan penuh keinsafan dan kebersamaan.
Salam Aidilladha. Indahnya lain macam.
Perusahaan kecil dan sederhana, impian besar. Jiwa SME Astro AWANI kembali menjelajah Malaysia. Dari Ipoh ke Kota Kinabalu, dari Melaka ke Lembah Kelang. Sesi pitching, pameran produk dan dialog bersama pemimpin industri serantau. Dapatkan inspirasi, ilmu dan peluang untuk kembangkan perniagaan anda semuanya di bawah satu bumbung. Kerana inilah medan impak sebenar. Jiwa SME menjana impak inovasi digital.
Tariffs on imports of products from China reaching up to 145%.
Tariffs on the rest of the world are sitting at 10%, with the potential for reciprocal tariffs to be reimposed within 90 days.
Kunjungan rasmi Presiden China ke Malaysia ini menunjukkan komitmen kedua-dua negara untuk meningkatkan hubungan diplomatik ke tahap yang lebih strategik.
Terima kasih kerana masih lagi bersama dengan Niaga AWANI, dan pada waktu ini kita akan bercakap mengenai air. Kenapa air? Kalau fikir air, kita tahu apa yang penting adalah berkenaan dengan penapis ataupun kita perlukan air yang cukup dan air yang bersih sebenarnya. Dan bercakap mengenai air dan juga mungkin teknologi-teknologi lain, kita akan bersama dengan satu jenama yang sudah orang kata terkenal ataupun selama bertapak di Malaysia, dan tidak lain tak bukan kita akan bersama dengan Mr. Ho Kian Chun, pengarah eksekutif Bukan Bebas dan juga Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Cuckoo International Berhad. Selamat pagi, terima kasih kerana bersama dengan saya pada pagi ini. How are you?
Ya, I'm good. Selamat pagi, Nabilah.
Selamat pagi. Okey, mungkin kita boleh mulakan perbincangan ataupun discussion ini. Mungkin Mr. Ho boleh ceritakan perjalanan Cuckoo di Malaysia sejak ia ditubuhkan pada tahun 2014 itu di Malaysia.
Ya, boleh. Cuckoo then set up because we want to be a healthy home creator. So yang ini adalah visi yang memang penting. So kami untuk memupuk kehidupan yang lebih sihat kepada Malaysia. And we started this company in 2014 October. So that's why 3 years I think is very important. So yang ini tahun-tahun yang saya nak terangkan. First one is 2014, then we established this business with the rice cooker and also a water purifier. So sekarang memang orang nampak Cuckoo sebagai water purifier brand, but in fact then we have our rice cooker also, multi-pressure cooker. So 2017 actually we started a plan actually called Good Plan. Yang ini adalah flexible rental plan, make our rental actually accessible and also affordable. I think this is 2017, and also last year actually we started our digital world. Sebab Cuckoo introduced Cuckoo.com, that means our Cuckoo.com and also even our Wonderlab. Then we want to introduce actually our business actually to the digital world. So this is how we started this business. And dalam Cuckoo actually kita ada memang business segment. Then we have 4 business segment. Then first segment will be the Cuckoo, and second segment our Cuckoo co-created. Then we co-created our aircon with Fujier. We co-created then our massage chair. Then we Ogawa, and also we co-created our mattress with Nepio. So this is our second segment. And third segment will be our nutritional and also skincare products, which is under a brand called Wonderlab and also Wonder TV. And our last segment kita ada Wonder Clean. Yang ni Wonder Clean adalah home care services.
Selain itu kita tahu yang info terkini ataupun berita terkini di mana Cuckoo dikatakan akan revise down the IPO price. Mungkin boleh Mr. Ho kongsikan apa objektif utama sebenarnya IPO pasaran utama yang akan datang ini dan bagaimana dana ini boleh kita peroleh ataupun boleh Mr. Ho peroleh untuk kita peruntukkan perkembangan ataupun pertumbuhan masa depan Cuckoo sendiri.
Cuckoo actually think IPO of course, and this is our very important milestone sebab dah masuk tahun ke-11. And why we want to do this IPO? Because then we want to have this enough fund actually then for us to do few things. First, of course, then kita nak adakan to expand actually our services and also our products. Sebab Cuckoo memang sekarang kita dah ada banyak SKU, 50 lebih SKU, but we want to expand our SKU by introducing more services and also product to the Malaysian markets. Yang second, actually the Nana actually we want to use actually for the we want to expand actually our omni channel. Sebab all this while Cuckoo actually we are focusing more on the agency force. So but last 2 years actually we started our second channel means actually our servicing they are able to do a CRM sales. And our last year then we started then just as I mentioned also then we enter into the digital world. Means that then we have our e-com, then we sell our product actually through TikTok, Lazada, Shopee, and some of this kind of the digital world. I think it's very important channel for us. And the third usage for our fund, actually then we want to make our operational efficiency and also then we want to expand actually our logistic capability to serve a better coverage actually to the Malaysian market. Because I think kita sebagai Cuckoo and also then what we want is then we want to help Malaysia actually people to raise up their standard living of the their living standard. That's the reason why we want to introduce more products to the Malaysian market.
But help us understand, adakah ini just new strategy for Cuckoo ataupun you just wanna arrange your market listing for Cuckoo?
For Cuckoo, actually all this while then we are already in this home appliances. But for the living products, of course, then we are expanding through our healthy home creator. That's why then kita nak tambah lagi itu service dan dengan number SKU. And for the omni-channel, all this while from 2014 to 2022, then we are focusing on the omni-channel. This is what kalau kata tambah for the e-com, yes, this is something actually very new to us. Then we want to expand and also we want to have a better market reach than through our e-com.
And we're reaching right now as we speak. Kita menghampiri hampir pertengahan tahun 2025 dan hampir memasuki tahun 2026. So mungkin apa perancangan untuk Cuckoo untuk tahun hadapan? Mungkin sedikit awal untuk kita bincang apa ini, tapi mungkin apa perancangan jangka pendek untuk 2026?
2026 actually then, of course then we are moving forward actually then to have a better strengthen our market position. Sebab sekarang Cuckoo dah in terms market position actually then we are second in terms of the revenue, second in terms of the active account and also largest in terms of the our this outlet. Sebab outlet kita sekarang dah ada 263 outlets in the market. And also one of our plan actually for this year and also next year also then we want to open more brand shop. So one of the fund utilization also then we want to open 3 brand shop this year and also 7 brand shop next year. So when talk about 2026, of course then you will see our brand shop. We have 10 brand shop, then new brand shop. The brand shop actually to play a role as a cash and carry. So kita memang sekarang kalau Cuckoo you nak order Cuckoo then you have to go through then our agents. But in future actually when come to this Cuckoo brand shop, actually then you can walk in and also you can order and also you can have some cash and carry item. But of course then cash and carry then we are focusing more on the rice cooker. Because Cuckoo brand actually is a well-known, very famous in Korea because of rice cooker. Then we have 87% of the market share, 87% market share. So for 2026 then of course then we will still want to focusing on our market share and also then based on the I share a bit on the market statistic. According to 2024 to 2029, actually the CAGR for the rental industry, actually then we still have more than 9.9%. That means market penetration baru sekarang 10 to 15%. That's why the market is still very wide. So we are quite optimistic and also then we know actually this market then can do well, especially then when come to the 2026 with the IPO status.
Is this meaning to say you're going to reduce the amount of agents, or is this just to cater to the markets?
No, we are still expanding because the agent market and also our service team is very important. Is a backbone of the Cuckoo business. So in order for us to have better market reach to the different segment, sebab e-com segment, e-com customer memang they have their own habit. So dia tak mungkin dia tak akan order daripada agency. That's why we want to have market reach and also better coverage, because we think this e-com is one of the best strategy for us to show them actually better market presence.
And throughout this whole 11 tahun, we've seen the positive progress of Cuckoo, and congrats for that. And perhaps bergerak ke hadapan, mungkin apa garis masa untuk IPO Cuckoo Malaysia dalam pasaran bursa saham?
Boleh. Sebelum saya cakap pasal IPO, I think I want to share a very important information, because sekarang kalau kita cakap pasal IPO, then we talk about the investor interest. And also the interest, I think you need to know then what is our past year performance. In 2024, then we able to achieve our highest hasil untuk 2024. Sebab kita capai 1.24 billion, artinya 1,240 juta. Kita punya revenue. But in terms of our profit, actually last year then we have a very good profit also. Then we have 128 millions of profit. Then compared with 2023, actually then is more than 48% of the growth. So this is our last year's result. And IPO, of course, then this is a very important milestone for us. That's why that's 10 tahun last year, and this year then is a very important this activity for us. Then with this IPO, then we want to get strengthened our market share, because then we know sebab kita nak create a long-term value for our investor and also then our stakeholders. For IPO, then kami akan ada closing actually next week. Next week, 5th of June. So sebelum pukul 5. So that's why then sekarang masih ada masa lagi. Kalau then you think this company then is worth for you to invest, then you should come in. Yes, you should come in, and also you should invest. Then we have our closing on 5th of June. Artinya next week, Kamis, pukul 5. So welcome everyone actually to be our stakeholders.
So 5 Jun pukul 5 and siapa yang berminat boleh mungkin jadi sebahagian daripada bersama Cuckoo Malaysia di Bursa Malaysia.
Ya, sebagai main market, because then we are in the main counter.
In the main counter, dan itu adalah orang kata mencipta sejarah baru dalam pasaran tempatan lah, kalau kita boleh katakan. Jadi mungkin sedikit orang kata rangkuman apa yang boleh Mr. Ho katakan, dan kalau dalam jangka masa panjang apa aspiration and hopes for Cuckoo International as a whole.
Cuckoo Malaysia actually we started because of the intention, as what I said, we want to raise up the standard living of Malaysian. So dengan visi macam ni, dengan maklumat macam ni, then we introduce our very effective model. This is rental and also subscription. And why rental, why subscription? Because we want to make our product and also services accessible and also affordable. I think these two A is very important. Sebab kalau sebagai orang biasa, kalau you nak pakai very good water purifier or mattress or massage, I think then you can just see but you cannot on it. That's why when we are promoting a very unique business model. That's why I always say that our business model is very effective. So dengan business model yang begitu unik, then with the most important is our current record, because then we already have accumulated more than 1 million of active accounts. Yeah, Malaysia kita baru ada 7.9 according to the Frost and Sullivan. Yeah, 7.9 million of the household. But currently, actually, we have accumulated more than 1.7, but our active user actually is more than 1 million. So hopefully, with everyone's participate, and we can grow, and also we can strengthen our market position. I think this is very important, because this is a healthy home creator company, and with this healthy home creator mission, and we want to everyone actually then you can participate into company and also be proud of this company also.
Amazing. That was Mr. Ho Kian Chun, pengarah eksekutif Bukan Bebas dan juga ketua pegawai eksekutif Cuckoo International Berhad, atas perkongsian dan juga masa yang diberikan di Niaga AWANI, dan I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
For the team as well.
Thank you.
Dan perkongsian ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam semua platform digital Astro AWANI dan juga astroawani.com. Kita jumpa lagi.
لبيك اللهم لبيك Kabar Haji kini kembali bersama saya Sanah ya.
Dan saya Izmir Faris membicarakan perihal ibadat dan berita haji.
Dan kita dapatkan juga perkembangan semasa daya rakan kita yang berada di Tanah Suci.
Untuk mendaki Jabal Nur
dari Mekah Al-Mukarramah.
Kabar Haji mulai 1 hingga 10 Jun bermula 7.15 malam di Astro AWANI
dan Astro Oasis.
Absolutely remarkable. Sedikit majlis mampu merubah kehidupan.
How did you do it?
Di saat imajinasi menguasai.
Wingardium Leviosa. Full of magical creatures. Nothing to worry about.
Sekalinya mampu berubah.
You can talk. I wished for a fairy tale life.
Keajaiban menanti anda.
Shall we?
Selami dunia majlis kami dan stream dengan apa jua cara sehingga 4 peranti mudah.
Di sinilah bermulanya legasi. Segalanya unggul, tersemat di hati. Permainan sepenuh jiwa dan raga kini melangkah ke arena dunia. Bakat kemahiran kini megah terserlah, merejam kencang, membenteng padu. Setiap inci gerakan penuh mentafsir hati nurani. Aksi legasi kini mendominasi sangkop DJ sepak takraw secara langsung di Astro.
Daulat Tuanku.
Asia tumpuan utama dunia. Dengan ekonomi yang semakin rancak, pembangunan lestari dan tenaga boleh diperbaharui, apakah pula impak kecerdasan buatan AI dalam perkembangan teknologi dan masa depan pekerjaan? Kami mendalami setiap berita dan cerita. Saksikan diskusi, dialog dan laporan khas di Agenda Awani Asia bersama koresponden khas kami setiap Sabtu 9 malam di semua platform Astro Awani.
Thanks very much for joining us. This is The Economy with me, Ibrahim Sani, in my office right now. He's a long-time friend of the show, Dr. Virendra Singh. He is the Senior Advisor of Tax Policy at KPMG Malaysia. Dr. Virendra, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
I think today we want to explore a little bit more on the global tax framework and its impact in Malaysia. I've been talking about the global tax framework for quite some time now, including the global minimum tax, trying to weed out the tax havens around the world, and many more.
Yeah.
How does this backdrop contrast with the current affairs that is currently happening right now, considering that very recently Trump and China has decided to reduce tariffs after a much interesting notion of Trump going berserker mode? And Xi Jinping doing his worldwide concert tour, visiting China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia, now Africa, and very recently the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, has visited Russia. There's a lot of happenings right now that is currently taking place. So how does that global tax framework tie up with Malaysia right now?
Okay, now first of all, thank you for having me on the show. And the fundamental point is this: a tax framework is a separate issue for what is happening right now in the world. All right, and let me explain that to you. The tax framework that we talk about, the global tax framework, why is there a need for us to try to establish something global? The reality of it is, let's go back to fundamentals. Malaysia, for example. Every country has a different tax system. Fundamentally, there's no such thing as alignment of tax systems across the world, right? And why is that so? Because tax is seen as a sovereign right of a country. And so when you look at all the taxation issues, different taxes, different tax legislation, different countries and so on, what you have is these challenges of aggressive tax avoidance that seems to have occurred when you have multinationals across borders, leveraging on different provisions in different countries and trying to get the best results. So as a result of multinationals doing whatever they do to obviously manage their bottom line, and get the best incentives that they can, you have issues about how do countries where they operate actually earn tax revenue from all these multinationals in particular. So the challenges that occurred was what led to the OECD coming out with what we call the Base Erosion Profit Shifting Initiative, or BEPS. And that's where global minimum tax came out of. Now, the BEPS initiative was undertaken by the OECD not because the world wanted them to do it. They just decided to do this. And part of the reason was to try to curtail this aggressive tax avoidance that I just spoke about, how multinationals across borders and can take advantage. The other reason why base erosion profit shifting came about was there was a need perhaps at that time that the OECD felt there should be some alignment across the world. And I think we can generally, I mean, perhaps hopefully both of us being accountant in some ways, can agree there is a need for some alignment across the world, because then you facilitate trade. And so when you look at tax systems around the world, I said earlier that we are misaligned. So the OECD initiative of BEPS was actually a good initiative that tried to align transfer pricing rules. They tried to align certain provisions in our double tax treaties. Right? And the idea was try to create some alignment so that businesses across borders can function more effectively, right? Because then you have lesser legislative differences to deal with. So I thought BEPS initiative was a very outstanding initiative that
but countries still race to the bottom in terms of lowering the tax rates, particularly in tax havens and semi-tax havens. Like I would argue, Ireland would be one of them, Hong Kong another place.
When I say BEPS, that's BEPS 1.0. And then BEPS 2.0 came out fundamentally because of this issue of trying to establish a global minimum tax. And why is that so? The global minimum tax was trying to set a stage to try to minimize the race to the bottom. Now, race to the bottom simply means that countries, in particular in the less developed world, in the developing nations, Malaysia being one of them as well, lower their tax rates and give lots of incentives. We are well known for pioneer status, so is Singapore, so is many other countries in Southeast Asia. So this race to the bottom has created leveraging issues among multinationals. They can leverage one country against another. For example, I can move out of Malaysia and relocate in Vietnam if you don't give me a very favorable tax rate or tax incentive. So that is why the race to the bottom doesn't add value to less developing countries, right? And so the OECD's initiative on BEPS 2.0 on global minimum tax was supposedly intended to give more revenue, tax revenue, to the less developed countries. Right?
Well, at least in theory, I don't know.
In theory. So you find lots of studies going around which seems to, some of them debunk this particular issue. Some of them are neutral on it, because data is actually one of our biggest issues, that the adequate data is still not there.
And of course, voluntary data as well. Not many tax jurisdictions want to share
everything.
So but I understand there's a lot of graphics that we can share throughout this conversation.
We can. And fundamentally, what I wanted to perhaps, for the audience as well, look at the fact that has there been global international cooperation in the area of tax? And there has been. So one of the slides that perhaps we can
so let's now look at the role played by the OECD and the United Nations. Let's put it up on the screen right now. So Dr. Verinda, why don't we go through this particular slide?
Yes, correct. So this slide is basically telling you about what is it that the OECD and the UN have done so far, right? And so when you look at the OECD, remember OECD is known as a rich man's club, where all developed countries are members. The developing countries cannot be members. So the issue here is about what have they done. They've actually come out with what they call a model double tax treaty convention, which Malaysia adopts as well in part. Now, on the other side of the UN has also got a tax committee, and they've also come out with a model double tax agreement format. So there are two different models: OECD model mainly for developed countries, and the UN model mainly for developing countries. And the distinction is fundamental. In a developing country, you would say, I will tax whatever you earn from my country, so source. Whereas in a developed world, you talk about, I will tax you where you are resident. So that's the fundamental difference. But a lot of the other provisions have got similarities. So we have that. The second thing that perhaps we can say in terms of what the OECD has done is actually came out with the transfer pricing guidelines, which have been fully adopted by Malaysia and many other countries. So that has been a very great contribution in terms of bringing transfer pricing to the fore and becomes a major issue. The other thing that you can see on the slide is this thing about the Global Forum on Tax Transparency and what they call it, exchange of information. EOI is exchange of information. That has been set up by the OECD, and that I think helps every country because it's a forum where you can discuss issues, and it's also exchange of information has already started. Tax information among countries started some time ago. Your point earlier was about, is it fully, are you sharing all the information? That's a moot point, all right? But there is some element. The other aspect is they've also set up a forum for harmful tax practices, and this refers to the tax incentives that we talk about. They have had discussion the last 15 years on this. So there's a forum where countries developed, get together and talk about what can we do better.
My problem with this is that OECD is not fully representative of all the markets that needs to be present.
Agreed.
Especially some fast-growing markets in the African nations, for instance. Some members are in Asia. I understand that I think Indonesia is part of OECD, if I'm mistaken.
They've applied.
They've applied, yeah. And you know, for a market that is the fourth largest, highly most populated nation, and they're not there, I'm not too sure India and China is there as well. It's just a bit bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, because the idea is you have certain criteria when you reach developed nation status.
So why not we create a whole gang of ourselves? Let's call it the Global South Cooperative Development Corporation.
There is a Global South initiative, and there's also something called the South Center based in Switzerland as well.
So South, tapi based in Switzerland.
Yes, very interesting, and funded by many developing countries.
Yes.
All right, and I found out that in Malaysia,
what's wrong with KL?
Malaysia also funds it. The reason why it's there is because the UN also has an office there. I think that was my main reason. The other thing, of course, for me is, as you said, why not locate here?
I don't know, South Sudan, let's try that.
So just coming back to the OECD, the last biggest thing that they did was the BEPS project that we just spoke about. So I think they have done a lot in terms of global alignment. But the UN has a tax committee set up 25 years ago. And what do the UN do? They have developed a tax treaty draft so that many countries, developing countries follow. So Malaysia actually adopts both the OECD and the UN tax treaty and try to mix and match. So we choose certain things from the UN model and certain things from the OECD. And I think it's fine because it's a choice. The other thing that the UN has also done, and remember one thing, one of the biggest issues in international tax cooperation is capacity building for the developing countries, because they don't have the capacity to do the very sophisticated things. So the UN came out with a practical transfer pricing guide and how you can manage your transfer pricing practices. The UN has also come out with a dispute resolution model about tax disputes. The other thing is, of course, they have also come out with how the countries can negotiate their tax treaties and giving them, this is part of capacity building. And the last one they're talking about is extractive industries. Why? Extractive industries is, you notice most of the extraction of minerals and all that are in less developed countries.
Yeah.
So the challenges are all about that. So that's what has happened so far in terms of the OECD and the UN contributing towards the global tax initiatives.
I want to deep dive into the UN Tax Committee as well. Let's pull up this particular slide, especially when it comes to talking about some of the subcommittees regarding some of the policies that is coming up from this committee. So let's pull up the slide on the UN Tax Committee subcommittees.
And this is the UN Tax Committee on, it's a very long name. It's called a Committee of Tax Experts. but we just make it UN Tax Committee. This committee is where I remember last year in October I attended Geneva. A meeting was actually of the UN Tax Committee.
Yeah, we had you on the show in October specifically because of this.
Yes, and I just came back in March from the follow-up meeting that they had with the UN Tax Committee in New York. And that was the last term of the serving members. Now they're voting in a new committee to take over for the next 5 years. All right, new composition. And I understand that Malaysia's Revenue Board has submitted a name, so I'm not sure whether that has been accepted by the Secretary General.
Is it your name?
No, it has to be a government and person serving government.
Let me check if it's my name then.
Yeah. So this particular UN Tax Committee has a number of subcommittees that have been set up. One is on transfer pricing, again about how we can improve things. The second one is about how do we keep updating the negotiation of double tax treaties. There's a subcommittee on that. The third one now set up in the last 5 years is environmental taxation issues, a subcommittee. And in the other one they are now looking at is, and this could be related to what you just started off the show with, by talking about tariffs. This was something to do with relationship of tax, trade, and investment agreements. So trying to advise the various countries about trying to make sure, remember when you do trade in a foreign country, there's also some kind of guarantees that the nation gives you. Then there's also tax. Then there's also cross-border initiatives. So how does this take shape? And that's a guidance that the UN is given as well. The other aspects of the UN is about, now they've started talking about what we call the wealth taxes and also health taxes. So they're giving guidance in terms of what other countries do and how we can pick up on this from in terms of improving your own tax system in your country. And the last two that are there are indirect tax issues as well as extractive industries. I think I've explained extractive industries are very important for the developing world because of minerals and how it's been extracted. And the main extractors turns out to be MNCs. So the issue is how do you protect your tax revenue by maybe withholding taxes and various other things. So that is what the UN Tax Committee is doing. And they also keep amending the tax treaties that I just mentioned, the double tax treaty framework. And recently they proposed an amendment on cross-border services. And that is a bit controversial as well because it actually says that countries can impose a withholding tax on all kinds of services. Good for the developing world, but not so good for the business world because multinationals will now be caught up with what you mean if all services, you actually have a wide range. It's not management services.
Yeah, of course.
It's not royalties and so on.
Yeah.
So that's how the UN actually has been functioning. So the question that arose is about, are you required to enforce whatever the OECD says and whatever the UN? You're not. So in the end of the day,
there's no penalty for not enforcing.
No penalty. So at the end of the day,
and there was no pressure for governments or other markets to impose that kind of one particular market to actually follow as well. It's a guideline. It's a guideline. So therefore, I think it's a good menu system that you have. You can pick and choose certain things. But I don't see any upside on any market trying to comply with it. No, there's no upside, but the developing world has an upside because they impose some of these withholding taxes. Yeah, they hope to collect revenue, right? But if some countries don't, then you do have leveraging, right? So if a developing country like Vietnam says, no, I will not impose a withholding tax, Malaysia imposes, then one market will definitely automatically become much more attractive than the other.
Yeah, business. So those are the challenges that we see in terms of this particular aspect.
So one of the things that I did slightly before doing this show is I tried to find a chorus of voices that has come on the show talking about global minimum tax, for instance. And I don't know whether it is humble bragging or it's a very sad life because many of my friends are all tax leaders in various organizations, including Farah Rosli, Teresa Go, Tan Hui Bang, Lian Seng, your compatriot, and many more. And at that point in time, they were all excited and they were all optimistic and enthusiastic about the global minimum tax. So now, after a few moments of ecstasy has died down, let's now try to unpack this on whether or not do you believe that the global minimum tax has taken the world by storm.
Yes.
Or have people collected themselves and calmed down over the whole notion?
I think you're absolutely right. When this thing was announced, the global minimum tax, you could see how seminars and discussions and podcasts were all ignited, right? Everyone is having, and we have lots of conferences where I've attended, being on a global minimum tax panel as well. And the issue is this: 55 to date, 55 countries have more or less adopted the global minimum tax.
Is Malaysia one of them?
Malaysia is one of them, but not fully. I'll explain a little bit. There are a number of aspects of the global minimum tax.
Sound like a lawyer. You sound more like a lawyer than you are an accountant.
I won't go into details about the various aspects. Right? There are about 3 or 4 parts to this global minimum tax. Malaysia has taken a couple of them. The others, they haven't. Again, it's a choice, right? So many countries have done most of it. They may not have introduced all aspects of the global minimum tax. Now, Malaysia did what they call a qualified domestic minimum top-up tax, because this was allowed. I explained very briefly, I think, for the benefit of listeners. What it actually says is that if you have a subsidiary in Malaysia of an in-scope multinational, which is then subject to this 15% global minimum tax, what will happen is that effectively, if they're only paying 5% here because of incentives, we then can collect the 10% additional and make it 15%. If we didn't have this qualified domestic minimum top-up tax, QDMTT in Malaysia, which was already passed in law, then the home country's tax authorities have the right to collect the tax. And that was unfathomable, right? We rather collect the tax ourselves. So most countries have imposed the QDMTT in their relevant legislation, Singapore included, because it protects your tax base, right? You can collect it. So Malaysia has done that, and it's actually enforced this year already. So that's what has happened. Now, a number of countries have actually stood back and are now reviewing it, right? And this is where challenges have come in, because I must say this, because it is one of the most complex changes that I've ever seen in my own professional career. And I dare say that I haven't read everything about the global minimum tax, because it runs into a few thousand pages of different guidelines. So my esteemed colleagues in the profession obviously have got themselves on board. But it only affects perhaps a few thousand MNCs in the world, because the scope is the 750 million euro revenue. But the idea of the OECD was eventually to lower the threshold so that more will be covered.
Something like our own tax rollout here.
So eventually you need to widen it.
For e-invoicing, for instance.
So e-invoicing is a separate issue.
No, what I mean is tiering down. First you got to meet the revenue and then.
But they haven't announced the tiering. The intention is there.
Yeah.
And I think, personally speaking, if you have the world imposes a 15% minimum tax on everything, every country does this, I think then you have true alignment. Will that ever happen? I doubt it, right?
Of course not.
Because, again, tax is a sovereign right, right? You need to do what you need to do to bring in investors. So what has happened in this particular, we call it global minimum tax, or GMT, or some people call it Pillar 2, is that it has created a huge vacuum in terms of resources. Countries don't have the technology or the resources or the manpower to analyze everything. Malaysia included, by the way. So what has happened is that African nations in particular, as the African Union, right, have decided to speak up, right? And therefore, what you have now is a certain pushback that has occurred to the global minimum tax. And this is where we've just had a conference last week as well in Malaysia called the IFA Asia Pacific Conference, where we had an OECD rep sitting on our global minimum tax panel. And look, to them, it's business as usual. They will keep looking and listening, and they may, I dare say, they may make some refinements, but they're not in any way throwing away the global minimum tax. It will continue to be there, but it's for you to decide. Like I said, a global minimum tax is a very good initiative, provided everyone complies.
Right? We don't have much time left, Dr. Verinder. Let's talk a little bit more about the resolution that was passed in the UN in December 2022.
Okay.
This is to develop a framework for the international tax cooperation.
Correct.
Let's pull up the slide right now on the 2022 resolution timeline as compiled by you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And perhaps you can walk through with us on this.
Correct. So again, the reason why this approach was taken was fundamentally because the African Union pushed for it, and they felt that the developing countries did not have too much of a say in the BEPS initiatives, the global minimum tax. They were part of it, but they were not allowed to influence the agenda. They felt they were not, their views were not heard. OECD pushed it through and that kind of stuff. So therefore, they put up a resolution at the UN to say the UN should be leading global alignment of taxes, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, they came up with this term, having a framework for international tax cooperation. The resolution was passed in 2022, December, by the UN. Fundamentally, they say, let's look into this. And then if you see on the slide, the next step was always about setting up some kind of a committee to look at the details. Finally, the resolution was passed in 2023. And now what happens is that we had an agreement to say we will set up an international framework of tax cooperation. That has been agreed. We were determining the terms of reference. That has just ended. When I was in New York, the meetings just concluded. And now we have a new committee which is actually going to iron out the criteria for cooperation and set up two different protocols, one on the issue of taxation of services and the other on dispute resolution. How do we, because they felt these two were the more important one. Now, issue is, if you were to analyze who voted for this and who voted against it, I think you can easily guess that the developed countries stood back, and the developing world is the majority. And the UN goes by a majority rule.
Well, General Assembly.
Yes, it goes by general rule. And
not,
therefore
not
even...
Securities Council. I mean, US has been vetoing Palestine for the longest of time.
So this goes to the General Assembly.
Yeah.
And therefore, in those situations, majority rule. And the developed countries didn't like that. They preferred consensus.
Yeah.
And OECD works on consensus. Actually, it means silence means you don't object, right?
Yeah.
So that's what they work on. So, but the issue here is about, will the voices of global South, global North all be heard? And this is the challenge. But I think the UN is the right body to perhaps do this.
Where do you think Malaysia's stand is when it comes to the international tax cooperation, tax equilibrium and equity across the board, and perhaps how does ASEAN intend to stake our claim in terms of trying to push our mandate forward?
Okay, so I was invited earlier this year to speak at the ASEAN Forum on Taxation in KL. And I was asked to share specifically on these developments at the UN. And I made some comments, but unfortunately I found out that the ASEAN Forum on Taxation is simply a forum to share knowledge. It doesn't have...
Sharing session.
Yeah, sharing session. It doesn't have the policy aspects in terms of dealing with it. Now, I'm of a strong view that ASEAN needs one voice, a coordinated voice when it comes to taxation. So when you look at the Base Erosion Profit Shifting Initiative, BEPS, where was the ASEAN voice? It actually wasn't there. When you now look at the global minimum tax, where was the ASEAN voice? There wasn't. Anti-global minimum tax voices came from African Union, and also there is a platform set up in South America, led by Colombia, to actually develop what they've, similar to the African Union, a pushback. But ASEAN can do better, and I believe, and given by what you started the show with, in terms of looking at trade and so on, taxation is very much connected in some ways, because trade means making it easier for you, whether it's a flat rate or whatever, whether it's low tariffs. The idea is assimilation and trying to encourage investment, right? We all want to grow. So ASEAN needs to have a coordinated voice when it comes to the ASEAN region having views on how they should tax. By the way, within ASEAN, we have different rates all over the place.
All over the place.
Including tariffs, including preferential
rates. And then, of course,
rates.
enforcement is another issue altogether.
Yeah, so we have lots to do. And I thought Malaysia, being the chair, could spearhead some of these initiatives to trying to align ourselves in terms of preferential rates, in terms of indirect taxes, in terms of, in fact, even our direct taxes. So ASEAN does have a place to stake. It's up to the leaders whether they want to do this. And even in the UN, when these resolutions were going on this global cooperation, only the foreign ministry officials were there, none of the tax policy guys. So in the end of the day, sometimes it's about our lack of capacity as well, resources, so we can't send everybody, and you leave it to the foreign ministry officials to vote on a tax issues. It's a dangerous thing. But anyway, I certainly hope that ASEAN will move in this coordinated fashion going forward, because taxation affects everybody, affects every country, and so why can't ASEAN have a united stand on this in some ways?
Death and taxes.
Certainty, yes.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. Virendrajit Singh, the Senior Advisor on Tax Policy at KPMG Malaysia. If you want to learn more about this, you can just head on to KPMG's website, or you can head on to Astro AWANI's website to find out more about the discussions such as this. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next one.
Dibawakan oleh penaja utama jelajah jiwa SME, Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda.